Typey, typey, type. Oh, hello there. You caught me typing in my new studio. It's nearly finished, basically. Welcome back to my channel, where I like talking about interesting differences in the UK and the US, and anything else I really find interesting. So the other day I uploaded a video about Americans say from Reddit, and you know what? I figured to bring in this new studio, why don't we bring back community video? You guys had a lot of funny and interesting comments on that video, and so I figured, let's just talk about the wildest ones. Funniest instance of Americans this week was them thinking that the US state of Georgia plans on joining the EU. Hey, listen, if you just got this little bubble and that's all you know, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, personally, I really love people from Scotland, South Dakota. They're my favorite of all people. I love their accent so much. I love a good Midwest accent. I mean, I heard that Jordan is selling some oil. I don't know who he is, but I heard there's a guy named Jordan selling oil. Huh. I tried. Please forgive the desk going up and down, okay? I am just working with this new setup and I'm trying to find a good system and see how high I really want it. On the getting fired for taking the bus one, yeah. As an American, every job I've had required me to provide proof that I had a car and a driver's license as part of the onboarding process. I'm a lab scientist. Driving has nothing to do with my job. How is that legal? Like, genuinely, how is that legal? I know we talked about it in the previous one about how the guy kept asking, like, why don't you get a car? Why don't you just stop taking the bus? But how is that legal if driving has nothing to do with your job and you are still able to get to work every day without fail? Let's just say you have someone drive you, such as carpooling, or you take the public transit if it exists and in your city. Why is that not allowed? I understand because, like me as well, every job that I got in America, that was like 100% in the interview question was, do you have reliable transport? Is it your own? Like, I think that's just part of American culture, but I'm pretty sure that's not legal, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the comments, that can't be legal because it's essentially classist doctrine. It means that anyone that cannot afford the incredible expense that it is just to have a car, you no longer can work. So you're stuck in a catch-22 of, well, I need money, I need job to get money to pay for a car, but I can't get a job without a car to make the money, and then you're just stuck. You actually can't win. America. The American dream. If for any reason I win a car in some sort of prize, I don't know what I would do with it. I might just keep it at my girlfriend's house out in Jabipsville, just so I don't have a car parking spot here, so I don't know what I would do with it. And it's not really useful in London, but being able to drive out and around outside, it'd be nice. It'd be nice. I'd like to get my driver's license this year. I would. Well, my UK driver's license. Ah, yes, you know, all of us Europeans never go on road trips. We never pop over to another country on the day to do shopping or anything. It's not super easy to travel between countries at all. Of course, if you didn't know this, Swiss people have such high taxes, they actually usually drive out of Switzerland to go to either Italy, Germany, or anywhere else, just to do their shopping to avoid paying the high taxes. So, like, no. I don't know how they drive. Maybe it's a horse and buggy, or like Canada, the dog sled. Should I try and have some sort of like teleprompter? I'm just reading off my screen. Listen, I'm in my office, I'm just looking at my screen. So as an American, part of the problem in my opinion is that we lack paid vacation time by law, which makes it difficult to travel out of the country. This lack of travel makes people unaware of what other countries are like, which causes Americans to say stupid things. Correlation. I use the internet to educate myself about other countries so that I can make informed statements, and other Americans should do the same if unable to travel. I get you. I think that's actually part of a problem, but also, I don't know how this wasn't even brought up. It's like, sure, you don't get paid holiday, which means that you're not as encouraged, but the US is very far away from many other countries. If anything, the US, when they do travel, most average Americans might go to like a touristy spot in Mexico or possibly in Canada if they're close. But the US is so large and so secluded from any other countries outside of the two I just spoke about that that's also a big deal. So if they did have paid holiday, which would be great, it's going to cost an arm and a leg just to visit a different country than those other two and possibly see how other countries exist. Maybe possibly named Georgia. But also, I wouldn't necessarily call the things people say as stupid, but it is definitely more uninformed, and that is just because of the situation they're in. Trying not to go too hard here. The worst part, those particular Americans genuinely believe they positively contribute to their country's standing on the world stage. Well, they contribute to the GDP, do they not? The grand penis. Nope. My American high school class was shown a map of Europe and was told to point out the countries we knew. Only one person raised their hand. They pointed out Italy. It's a boot. The other person pointed out Ireland and said, that's England, right? As a 16-year-old who spent most of their life in Europe, and for my age, pretty knowledgeable about world geography, I was gobsmacked. Well, there you go. Check your privilege. I am a bit blown away with that, only because age 16, something clearly failed there in the education system. I know that in my social studies class, which I think is the closest we get to geography in the States, I had to make sure I knew the countries in Europe, or at least like France, Italy, Germany. I even did a whole chapter just on Italy. I had the boat of Italy kicking the bowl of Sicily. I actually had a British teacher for my history class in 7th grade, though, so maybe that's why. I wonder what area he was from. I bet he could have been from, like, Yorkshire. I would have been like, wow, he sounds so fancy. Go on, then. What's up next? I live in Canada, and I've been asked dead seriously if we all live in igloos and dog sled everywhere. I don't think I've ever stared at someone so long just for wondering who tied their shoes for them. Seriously, though. Do you live in igloos? I used to think that, too. Then I started kindergarten. Jesus. Private company wants to pay workers more. Well, that's socialism. The government should intervene and tell that private company what to do. That involves too much thought. You can't put those two together. You just have to have one thought, and you've got to drill that in. Thing I don't like, communism. Did you see that US lady on TikTok that was upset and concerned the rest of the world weren't doing practice drills for school shootings? So she wanted to share her knowledge so the rest of the world could prepare and learn. No, as I don't use TikTok. However, was she taking the piss? She's got to be taking the piss. That can't be a real thing. Because the one thing that many Americans have under their brain ready to reply with is, as soon as you bring up that school shootings aren't a thing anywhere else in the world, well, Americans go, well, we have rights. So, like, she must assume there aren't school shootings because there aren't guns, right? Right? I grew up in China. Each year, the senior class would make t-shirts to raise money for their senior trip. Now, one year, the shirts said, I ride a panda to school. I made the mistake of wearing it when I went to Alabama. People didn't even question the legitimacy. They just asked me how soft or fast they go. Listen, that's a joke. That's a joke. It's a joke. I'm not taking this seriously. This would make me so upset. I can't do it. This reminds me of the time I visited the US with my parents when someone came up to us and said they heard us say a slur when we were speaking Korean. And my parents can't speak English, and so I explained to them what they heard us say and what it translates to in English, and they were straight up like, your language is racist. That literally as if someone was, to put it in perspective, the same thing with the Crayola crayon. It's like, this color is negro, is black, in French, in Spanish, in, whoa there. I don't want to hear about that. It's the way that it sounds, from my tiny little perspective, your language is racist. Obviously, that's from this person's incredibly narrow-minded perspective of the world, but just imagine how many English words sound like inappropriate words in other languages that you don't even have to think about. That's just food for thought. From the Netherlands, one time an American told me to be grateful for him because he freed us from the Germans in World War II. I just took a deep breath. You did nothing for us. Your grandparents may have done a little for us, but the Canadians and British freed us. Don't demand fame for something you got nothing to do with. Americans freed the French, if I'm not mistaken. I think this shit almost had a stroke and proceeded to say Canadians were also in war with the Germans, so that was impossible. Why don't you guys educate your people? I mean, it's just the perspective of learning U.S. world history. It's kind of like you learn about what started World War II and that things just kind of got out of hand. But from my remembrance of it, it's basically like, here's how it started. Things went bad, but from the U.S. perspective, we were being isolationist and kind of not doing things, trying to make sure that we were okay, while also feeding the flames a little bit. And then we jumped in after Pearl Harbor happened and we saved the day. So it makes sense that that is kind of the mindset of like, oh yeah, we say, because like that is what we're taught. I think a huge amount of work needs to go into fixing the curriculum so that it's not so because like at the end of the day, so many of these things come down to poor education and or incredibly US-centric, ethnocentric world history. World history. This is a much better angle. I'm very happy about this. All right, so next up we've got, as an American and a huge geography nerd myself, this hurts so much. Absolute secondhand cringe. I know we don't get any comprehensive education on the rest of the globe, but there are books and documentaries on the internet for a reason. I don't blame people, especially kids, who've never been exposed to anything outside their small American bubble, but like, look at a map for Christ's sake. Well, here's the thing. I believe, like, sure, look at a map exists, but for what reason would someone look at a map? Like, I, on my free time, don't just open up a map of, like, I don't know, Malaysia. I just don't do that. I have no purpose to. And that's why I do think it's so incredibly important to get this stuff done as a kid. Like, for instance, how often do you guys use your upper level calculus in a day-to-day? Probably not as much. But if you're like me, it's still in here. I can still do derivatives and integrals and all the other fun stuff. And so if surface level, I'm not even asking for anything too specific, but if a surface level education was performed for the whole globe, where certain countries are and maybe how different systems of government work in the US education, that would just be so great, because it then has a helpful chance of decreasing that American exceptionalism where people just do not know of other countries' existence, for instance. Yeah, I think there we go. Evan for president. Vote for me. I will get rid of citizenship-based taxation. Hey. I live overseas and have commented on your videos before about my tales of positive things being overseas. I get many responses from people like, well, at least America is free. Do you enjoy living in a police state? Or how is communism? Seriously, guys, living overseas has its positives and its negatives. The biggest plus is that I'm a teacher. I get paid more here in China. Well, that is a police state, and it's also communism. And okay, from this point, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm on your side, but also, of all of the places to bring up that point, I feel like how is living in a police state / communist is a valid question for someone to ask. You literally live in one of those. It's not like, you know, you're living in France and it's like, how's the communism? You're literally in a communist country that cracks down on freedoms. I think that's valid, all right? I think that's actually 1 point for the Americans on this one. I'm sorry, guy. As long as the tone of their question was, like, intriguing, like, oh, I'm curious what it's like living there, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As an American, I'm very disappointed with our internet representation. Well, I genuinely am as well. It's one of those things that's like, you realize a lot more once you leave. You can just see, like, oh, hey, ugh, that's not a good look. It's almost like when you realize, you look at like old photos you took and uploaded and you're like, oh my God, I thought that was a good haircut. Probably me in 5 years when I look at this. But if you're someone that's also upset about the way America is portrayed, you can be the change. Anytime you hear someone say something, maybe the least informed you've ever heard, maybe just try and inform them in a polite way. It feels like it's not our job, sure, but also maybe we can be vocal. Join your PTA, your Parents Teachers Association. All of us millennials, Gen Zers, boomers, Gen Xers, we need to stand up and actually try and implement better education, because that's really the only thing that's going to help this out, is education from like K to 12. Is that a thing people say in the UK? K-12? You know, kindergarten or reception, I think is what it's called. Either way, hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to watch another one of mine, you can click any of these. And thank you so much for catching up. Please tell me what your thoughts are on my new studio setup, because I'm really, really happy with it. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you here next week. Goodbye.